Before I tell you what happened that night, I have to ask, from which city are you watching me right now? I always love knowing where my listeners are from because every place holds its own quiet stories just like mine. And this one, well, I never thought I'd be sharing it with anyone. It started on one of those evenings where the air feels heavy, like it's holding a secret. The house was calm, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the background. I just finished washing the dishes, my hands still a little warm from the water, when I heard Adrian walk in from the back porch. Adrian is my only son. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that fills a room without him trying. He's always been the kind of man who carries his thoughts quietly like heavy stones. He never wants anyone else to lift. But that night, something in the way he moved caught me off guard. He didn't go straight to his room like usual. Instead, he lingered in the kitchen doorway, watching me as if he was trying to memorize every small thing about the moment. The light above the sink, the way I was drying a glass, maybe even the faint scent of lavender from the soap. When our eyes met, it was different. It wasn't the casual, fleeting glance we'd shared thousands of times over the years. His gaze held me there, rooted in place. It was as if he was looking past my smile, past the familiar, and straight into the part of me I don't let anyone see. "Mom," he said quietly, like the word was both a question and an answer. I paused, setting the glass down on the counter. "What is it, Adrian?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the kitchen, closing the distance between us. The sound of his footsteps on the tile felt louder than it should have, each one pulling him closer until he was standing just a few feet away. I could see the smallest details, the way the light caught in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor in his breath. There was no anger there, no sadness, just a kind of searching, as though he'd come to a realization he wasn't sure how to put into words. "You've been different lately," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Quiet. Like you're carrying something you won't share." I didn't know how to respond. He wasn't wrong. I had been quieter, more reflective, maybe even distant. Life has a way of making you retreat inward sometimes, and I thought I'd hidden it well enough. But Adrian, my boy, who used to scrape his knees and hide his tears, had noticed. I turned slightly, leaning back against the counter. I didn't think he'd notice, I admitted. His brow furrowed. "I notice more than you think." The moment hung between us, delicate and still. I realized then how much time had passed without us truly talking. Not the small everyday exchanges about bills, groceries, or errands, but real talking. The kind where you strip away the noise and just see each other. "Adrian," I said softly, "sometimes it's easier to stay quiet. Feels safer." He stepped closer, and there was something almost protective in the way he looked at me. "You don't have to be quiet with me, Mom. Not anymore." That "not anymore" echoed in my head. It was a promise and maybe even a plea. I could feel the weight of his sincerity pressing into the space between us, filling it with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Connection. For a moment, the years seemed to dissolve. I didn't see the man he'd become. I saw the little boy, who used to look up at me for reassurance, now looking at me as though he wanted to give it back. The refrigerator hummed on. Outside, a soft wind brushed against the windows. Inside, my heart was beating faster than it should have, not from fear, but from the realization that something was changing. We stood there, neither of us speaking, just letting the silence do the talking. His eyes didn't waver, and I knew, without him saying another word, that whatever was different between us had already begun. I didn't move at first. It felt like the whole house had taken a slow breath and was holding it, waiting to see what we would do with the quiet we just created. I could still feel the warmth of the dishwater in my palms, the damp towel draped over my wrist like a small surrendered flag. When I finally pushed off the counter, the room seemed to tilt just enough for me to notice how tired I'd been without saying it out loud. "Tea?" I asked, because sometimes you need a small, ordinary bridge to cross a big uncertain river. Adrian nodded. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table but didn't sit, his hand resting on the back like he might change his mind. I set the kettle on and reached for the good cups, the chipped blue ones with the tiny white flowers we've had for as long as I can remember. The light above the stove flickered once, and then steadied, painting the counters in a soft, patient glow. He glanced at the window where the yard was turning from dusk to something darker. "Do you ever listen to the wind out there?" he asked, almost to himself. "Only when I'm ready to hear it." I said, surprising both of us. The kettle clicked off. I poured, and the steam curled up between us like a thin veil we were both willing to lift. We sat across from each other, our knees almost touching under the table. He wrapped his fingers around his cup the way he used to as a boy when he come in from playing in the snow, eyes red-shaked and shining. For a second that little boy flickered over his features, and then the man returned, steady, concerned, searching. You said, "I've been quiet." I began. You're right. The words felt heavy and honest, like stones I'd carried a long way, and finally sat down. I don't know if the word is lonely. Maybe it's invisible. I go through the day doing all the right things, and then at night I sit and feel like the house is too big and I'm too small inside it. He didn't jump in. He let the sentence finish falling, and then he nodded, slow and thoughtful. I've noticed it, and I didn't know whether to press or to give you space. I didn't want to make it worse. The way he said it, careful, deliberate, told me he'd been thinking about this for a while. I watched a tiny ribbon of steam disappear from his cup. You've grown into a man who thinks before he moves, I said. That's new. Or maybe I'm just seeing it. I've been trying, he said. I started talking to someone, a counselor. After that long winter when everything felt heavy. He moved his eyes to mine and held them there. I realized I carry a lot inside, and it keeps me at a distance. I didn't like what that was doing to us. The quiet deepened, but it didn't hurt. It felt like the moment before rain when the air is soft and ready. I'm proud of you, I said, and too many memories crowded my throat at once. The baking soda volcano for 5th grade science, the first heartbreak at 17, the box of wobbly clay bowls he made in college, and gave me as if they were treasure. I'm proud and I'm sorry. For what? His voice was a little rough for acting like I had to carry everything alone. I looked down at my hands, the faint lines and freckles, the places where time had signed its name. I didn't want to worry you. Or maybe I didn't want you to see me uncertain. Parents get used to being the strong ones, and we forget we're allowed to be people. He exhaled, the kind of breath that sounds at the end of a long walk. You're allowed with me. You're allowed. Something loosened behind my ribs. I told him about the doctor's appointment I'd put off and finally rescheduled. About the box of old letters I'd been avoiding in the hall closet. About the fear that creeps in when the house gets quiet and the clocks feel too loud. I told him the truth I hadn't said out loud, that sometimes at this point in life I feel like the best rooms of the house have already been visited, and I'm just walking the halls to check the lights. He listened the way good people listen. I steady, phone face down, hand still. When I finished, he reached across the table and put his hand over mine. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a door opening. The warmth of his palm grounded me. Mom, he said, I looked into your eyes in that doorway and realized I've been seeing the outline of you, not the inside. I don't want that anymore. I want to know what you're carrying. I want you to know what I'm carrying. Not out of obligation, out of choice. I smiled a little, though it shook. Choice is a beautiful word. We carried our tea into the living room. The lamp by the sofa threw a soft circle of light over the coffee table where a photo album had been sitting untouched for months. I set my cup down and opened it, the plastic pages whispering as they turned. There we were years back, chasing bubbles in the yard, a Thanksgiving where the turkey came out underdone, and we laughed until our stomachs hurt. A summer road trip with a map spread across our knees and all the wrong turns turning out right. Adrian leaned in. I remember that day, he said, pointing to a picture of us at the boardwalk, wind-tossed and sun-dazed. You taught me how to stand where the waves break without losing my footing. I was teaching myself too, I said. We fell into that gentle rhythm old photographs call forward. The piecework of remembering. The mending it offers. The album made it easier to touch the tender places. Expectations we never said. Times we disappointed each other without meaning to. The unspoken way grief rearranges a family's furniture when no one's looking. Not accusation, not blame, naming. It felt like turning on lights in rooms we hadn't entered in a while. When the words ran out for the moment, we let the night breathe. Outside, a car passed slowly, its headlights slipping along the wall like a quiet tide. Somewhere 2 streets over, a dog barked twice and then gave up. The house seemed to exhale, and I realized I wasn't bracing anymore. Can I ask you something? I said. Anything. When you looked at me in that doorway, what did you see that was different? He paused and actually thought about it, which somehow mattered more than the answer itself. I saw you looking back at me the way I look at the mirror when I'm trying to decide who I am, he said. Not as my mother, not as the person who fixes things, just as Emily. And I realized I don't know Emily well enough. I want to. Hearing my name like that in his mouth and in that tone felt new and old at the same time. It wasn't distance. It was recognition. It said, I see you. It asked, will you let me? I nodded. Then let's try something different. I said, let's stop tiptoeing through the days. Let's make space on purpose to know each other as we are now. We made a plan not because plans solve everything but because they give you a place to start. Tuesday dinners, just the two of us. Foams off, stories on. A Saturday to fix the loose porch step together. A Sunday afternoon to pull down the boxes in the hall closet and decide what to keep, what to let go of, and what to honor without keeping. Little anchors in the week so the days wouldn't drift. He grinned at the mention of the porch, that boyish grin that always undoes me. I'll bring the tools, he said. And I'll bring the lemonade, I answered, and we both laughed. Not the loud, showy kind, but the soft laugh that proves you've already come a long way. The night grew deeper. He stood to go, then hesitated, looking at me like there was still one more thing he wanted to say, but needed an extra second to find. I stood too. We didn't hug the way we sometimes do, quick and distracted. We stepped toward each other like people who choose to meet halfway. The embrace was steady, careful, present. No rush, no pretending we weren't changed. When we let go, the room felt larger, as if the walls had leaned back to give us space. He picked up his cup, then set it down again, and smiled with a kind of relief that reached his eyes. Good night, Mom, he said. Good night, Emily. Good night, Adrian, I replied. The sound of it, his name and mine braided together, settled somewhere deep. After he went to his room, I stayed in the living room with the lamp and the album and the cooling tea. I ran my fingers over a photo where we're both squinting into too much sun, happy without knowing it. The clock ticked, gentle and ordinary. I realized the house didn't feel too big anymore. It felt like a place where something right had begun. I washed the cups this time, letting the warm water linger longer than it needed to. I dried them and put them carefully in the cabinet, listening to the tiny click of ceramic meeting wood. Then I turned off the lamp and let the hallway guide me by memory. Before I reached my room, I paused and looked back at the square of darkness where the living room was, surprised by the comfort it gave. In bed, I studied the faint patterns of streetlight on the ceiling. I thought about that first look in the kitchen doorway, and how much can change in a gaze when someone is truly ready to see you. The wind moved through the maple tree outside, a soft sifting sound that reminded me of pages turning. I didn't know exactly what our Tuesdays would bring, or what we'd find in the hall closet, or how many porch boards we'd have to replace before it felt solid underfoot. But I knew this. We had decided the floor between us was worth fixing, and we had both brought our hands to the work. Somewhere between those thoughts sleep came, not the thin kind that slips away at any noise, but the good sleep that stays. And just before I drifted fully under, I felt that quiet certainty again, the one that had started in the kitchen and moved through the whole house. When he looked into my eyes, something was different. Maybe what was different was me finally willing to be seen. Maybe what was different was us finally willing to see. The following Tuesday came quicker than I expected. The day had been one of those late summer afternoons, where the air feels warm enough to lull you into forgetting the months will change soon. I set the table early, nothing fancy, just 2 plates, a small vase with 3 daisies from the garden, and the familiar chipped blue cups from the other night. There was a roast in the oven, filling the house with that comforting scent that always seems to bring people closer. I found myself checking the clock more often than usual. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was more like anticipation, the kind you get before opening a letter you've been waiting on. When Adrian finally came through the door, the faint scrape of his boots on the mat felt like the sound of something dependable, a rhythm we could return to again and again. Smells good, he said, setting his keys in the bowl by the door. I smiled. It's nothing special, just something to make the evening feel like it's ours. We sat down to eat the daisies between us. At first, our talk was light, the neighbor's dog that kept sneaking into our yard, the creak in the back gate that needed fixing. But it didn't take long for the conversation to dip below the surface. He told me about a memory from when he was 8, a day I hadn't thought about in years. We'd been at the lake and a sudden summer storm rolled in. The sky had turned the strange green-gray color that warns you lightning isn't far away. He remembered me pulling him under a picnic shelter, wrapping my sweater around his shoulders even though I was soaked to the skin. I remember thinking, he said, that you were the safest place I'd ever be. I sat with that for a moment, and now I asked, not afraid of the answer. He hesitated, then smiled, slow, deliberate. Now, I think you're still a safe place, but you're also someone I'm learning to protect back. There was a warmth in that answer that went beyond the roast on the plate. It reached back into all the years when the balance between us had been uneven. Me giving, him taking, both of us thinking that's the way it had to be. After dinner we moved to the porch. The boards creaked under our chairs, and the night air carried the faint hum of cicadas. I brought out lemonade in a pitcher beat with condensation, and we sat there like we'd been doing it for decades, only now we were conscious of it, choosing it. At some point the conversation drifted toward things we'd never said before. He admitted he'd been afraid of becoming like his father in the ways that didn't work, the silences that lasted too long, the reluctance to admit when something hurt. I told him I'd been afraid of him growing so independent that he wouldn't need me anymore, and how that fear sometimes made me pull back before he could. The truth of it was neither dramatic nor heavy. It was just honest, and it hung in the air between us like clothes drying on a line, each piece swaying but still connected. We made plans again. Small things, repairing the porch next Saturday, bringing out the photo albums for a proper look, maybe even starting a vegetable garden in the spring. He promised to teach me the card game his friends played at the cabin last winter. I promised to finally share my mother's biscuit recipe, the one I'd always kept in my head, never written down. It was well past dark when we stood to go inside. The porch light caught the edges of his hair, and I noticed how his eyes softened when they met mine. There was no urgency, no rush, just a quiet knowing. "Mom," he said, "I'm glad we're doing this." So am I. When I went to bed that night, the house didn't feel like walls and a roof. It felt like a place we were building again, not from scratch, but from what had always been here: moments, trust, and the choice to really see each other. And in the dark, before sleep found me, I thought about that first evening in the kitchen, about how his gaze had stopped me cold, not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was finally unguarded. That was the difference. That was the shift. Adrian had looked into my eyes and I had looked into his, and somewhere in that exchange we'd both decided to stay. Sometimes the biggest changes don't come with fireworks or grand gestures. They begin with a single look. That night in the kitchen, when Adrian looked into my eyes, I didn't just see my son. I saw the man he had become, and he saw the woman I really was. And from that moment on, we weren't just family bound by blood. We were two people choosing to meet each other again and again with open hands and open hearts.